Hercule Poirot and the Closed Curtain. During the Murder, Chapter 1. Dinner at Giverny House. The evening at the Giverny mansion unfolded with the kind of restrained elegance that only old money could sustain. The crystal glasses clinked with forced politeness, and the silences were as calculated as the smiles. From the dining-room window, the Seine could be seen flowing with its usual majestic slowness, although that night its reflection was obscured by heavy clouds. The storm was announced with distant lightning flashes, but the real clashes were about to happen behind closed doors. The hostess, Madame Lorraine Giverny, widow of a retired diplomat, sat at the centre of the table like a pivot around which attention revolved. She was a slim woman in her 60s, with icy eyes and a sharp voice. To her left, her niece Camille smiled politely, though her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her napkin. To the right, Dr. Benoit Larocque droned on about the qualities of a Burgundy wine that no one present seemed to really enjoy. The other guests completed the usual closed circle. Retired Colonel Jean Armand, with his stiff moustache and even more inflexible manner, Mademoiselle Clémence Dubois, a young piano teacher with an evasive gaze, and finally Madame Giverny's personal secretary, Paul Maillard, a man with a soft voice and even softer steps. Neither of them knew it yet, but that night would be the last for one of them. The murder occurred in the early morning, in the library. At 6:30 in the morning, the maid Elise discovered Madame Giverny's body slumped beside her mahogany desk. There was blood on the carpet, a clear, unmistakable stain, as if death had arrived without hesitation. A heavy marble sculpture, a bust of Julius Caesar, lay beside the corpse. There was no doubt it had been used as a weapon. But the most disconcerting thing was the curtain. One of the curtains covering the large windows was completely closed, while the other remained open, and that was unusual. Madame Giverny had an obsessive habit of always leaving them symmetrical. Everyone who had worked with her knew this. The curtains had to be either closed or open, but never uneven. At 9 o'clock sharp, Hercule Poirot arrived, summoned by the young Inspector Girard, who was familiar with the Belgian detective's reputation. Poirot made his entrance with his usual dignity and elegance. He wore a perfectly ironed light grey suit, with an immaculate white handkerchief and his ebony cane. He briefly examined the crime scene, tilting his head in interest at the drawn curtain. "Curious," he murmured, more to himself than to Girard. "Very curious. It's not the crime itself that interests me, mon ami, but the curtain." Girard frowned. "The curtain?" Poirot gave a slight smile. "Yes, the curtain. Often it's the seemingly trivial details that give the killer away." Poirot didn't touch anything. He just observed. With meticulous steps, he walked around the perimeter of the library, paused in front of the stacks, inspected the desk, and then the lifeless body of Madame Giverny. Finally, he pointed out the position of the fallen bust. "Was it moved?" "No, sir. We found it like this," Girard replied. "And the mere guests?" "Still in the house. No one's come out." "Perfect," said Poirot, his eyes twinkling. "Then, monsieur, the murderer is among them. It will be a matter of watching and listening, and, of course, getting them to talk. In the living room, where the suspects waited, unaware that they were considered such, silence reigned. Poirot entered, greeted them with an impeccable bow, and introduced himself with his characteristic Belgian accent. "Mesdames, Messieurs, I'm afraid I have bad news. Madame Giverny has been murdered." A stifled cry escaped Clémence Dubois. Camille Giverny instantly blushed. Colonel Armand immediately stood up, as if obeying a military order. "What the hell are you saying?" he roared. Poirot was unfazed. "What I'm saying, sir, is that the crime occurred while you were sleeping. And since no one has left this house, one of you wasn't sleeping." There was a murmur. Poirot raised a hand. "I ask for calm. I won't make accusations yet, but I will begin with private interviews, one by one. And believe me, in time, the truth will come out." His gaze moved from face to face, lingering a second longer than necessary on Camille, who lowered her eyes, then on Dr. Larocque, whose jaw tightened. Finally, on Paul Maillard, whose expression was blank. Poirot straightened and took a slight step back. "And remember one thing, my friends. In crimes like this, the human mind is the battlefield, not the crime scene." In his room, as he organized his notes and traced the beginning of his little web of deduction, Poirot murmured, "A closed curtain, an open mind, and someone here is lying. Small grey cells, they are already working." Chapter 2. The interviews begin. The morning at Giverny House had become as dense as the overcast sky that enveloped the landscape. The coffee served on Limoges porcelain failed to calm the nerves of those present, who moved cautiously between rooms lit more by anxiety than natural light. Hercule Poirot, always punctual, had already arranged the music room as a place for interviews. He sat in front of the closed piano, with his leather notebook and a gaze that seemed to penetrate walls. First to pass was Colonel Jean Armand. "Colonel," Poirot began gently, "tell me, what time did you retire last night?" "Around 11. Madame Giverny insisted on playing bridge, but I declined. My health isn't what it used to be. And did you hear any noises during the night?" "Nothing, although," he added with a pause, "I swear I saw a shadow in the hallway around 2. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "A shadow?" "Yes, I thought it was Camille. Her room is at the end of the east wing." Poirot nodded slowly, making notes in his notebook. "Thank you, Colonel. Your memory will be valuable." The second to appear was Paul Maillard, the secretary. His composure was unshakable, but Poirot detected a certain stiffness in him, as if he rehearsed every word. "Monsieur Maillard, your relationship with Madame Giverny was close, right?" Paul folded his hands. "Professional, Monsieur Poirot. I kept your accounts, organized your correspondence, nothing more. And last night, I worked in the office until 11:30. Then I went to my room. Did you notice anything unusual? No. Although Madame Giverny argued on the phone with someone. I don't know who, but her tone was harsh. What time was that? Just after 10. Poirot narrowed his eyes. "Did you hear what he was saying?" "Just fragments. Something about betrayal and don't he dare come tonight." Poirot made a quick note. "Interesting. Very interesting." Next came Mademoiselle Clémence Dubois. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she avoided Poirot's gaze. Her fingers trembled slightly as she sat down. "Clémence, what were you doing last night after dinner?" "I read a little in my room. I like to carry a detective novel with me, although I find them less entertaining now. Poirot inclined his head. Understandable. Did you hear anything during the night? She hesitated. Maybe footsteps. Downstairs. I thought it was Elise. And did you hear Madame Giverny's voice? No, just music. Very low, like a waltz. Music. Yes, I'm sure. Poirot watched her for a long second. Thank you, mademoiselle. That will be all. For now. When Camille entered, her face was pale, but her chin was firm. She sat down with an air of restrained resistance. Mademoiselle Giverny, Poirot began, you are the sole heir, are you not? That's what everyone thinks. I have no idea about the details of the will, and last night I retired early. I wasn't feeling well. Migraines. Did you take anything? A sedative. I can show you the bottle if you want. Did she take it alone? Of course. Are you implying something? Poirot smiled without malice. I'm just watching, mademoiselle. Colonel Armand said he saw a shadow near his room at 2 a.m. Camille blinked. Then it must have been Elise, or himself. Poirot took note, without taking his eyes off her. And you didn't hear your aunt's telephone argument? No, although he'd been in a bad mood for several days. He was threatening to change his will. He wanted to punish someone, but I don't know who. Finally, Dr. Benoit Larocque. He walked in with a confident stride, but with a slight twitch at the corner of his lip. Doctor, what time did you leave? After midnight. I was talking to Paul about a medical textbook we found in the library. And then I slept like a log. I didn't hear a thing. Poirot nodded. Were you Madame Giverny's personal physician? In a way. I gave her advice, but she preferred home remedies and oriental teas. Were you interested in his will? Larocque was slightly offended. Of course not. She was a friend, not a source of income. Poirot closed the notebook and stood up. Thanks, everyone. With this, I have enough to start observing. Left alone, Poirot walked toward the library. He paused once more in front of the drawn curtain. He ran his fingers along the fabric. Why you? He whispered. A small, insignificant detail, perhaps, but not for Poirot. An argument, a shadow, a distant waltz, a disobedient curtain, and still no one's mentioned the will. His eyes shone as if he already sensed something. Oui, everything is starting to take shape. Chapter 3. The Lady in the Curtain. The morning dragged on unhurriedly in the Giverny house, as if time itself feared disturbing the atmosphere thick with suspicion. Poirot, after his breakfast, a cup of hot chocolate and a perfectly symmetrical slice of toast, asked Elise, the maid, to accompany him to the library. Not as a suspect, but as a witness to the deceased's habits. Mademoiselle Elise, said Poirot, as she approached with timid steps, you were the first. To discover the body, weren't you? Yes, monsieur. Like every morning, I came to open the curtains and prepare Madame Giverny's tea. And did you notice anything strange when you entered? The right curtain was closed. I always leave both open when I go out the night before, as she requested. That asymmetry. It gave me a bad feeling. Poirot nodded, pleased. That curtain is the key. Tell me, is there a way to close it from the outside? Elise looked at him with round eyes. No, sir. They're secured from the inside. unless one comes in through the window, but they're too high up. Only a cat could do it. Poirot approached the window and examined the frame. No trace of forced entry. No mud, no fingerprints, only a slight trace of disturbed dust on the inside handle. And Madame's cane. It's usually on the coat rack in the hall, but she didn't use it yesterday. She was sitting there most of the afternoon. Poirot frowned. And the phone? In the library. It didn't move. It still has the last number dialed, according to Inspector Girard. Poirot tilted his head. "And do you know who he called?" "No, sir." But she hung up, very upset. Then she locked herself away and didn't allow anyone to bother her. Poirot looked around the office in silence. Then he turned around with a restrained movement. "Mademoiselle, one last question. Did Madame Giverny trust you?" Elise swayed. "I think so. But lately she'd been very tense. She'd said that the past was coming back." "The past? Did he mention any names?" "Just one." He muttered, "I shouldn't have signed anything, but now it's too late." Poirot nodded slowly. "Thank you, Elise. That's been very helpful. You may leave." The moment the door closed, Poirot looked at the curtain again. He went over, and this time touched it carefully. He noticed the handle. It had a loose thread. He gently pulled it off and examined it. It was a hair, not blonde, not brown. It was grey, short, masculine. Poirot placed it in a white handkerchief with extreme care. Murderers who leave small traces do not escape. Grey cells, they don't allow it. Poirot later asked Inspector Girard for access to the will. "There's a sealed envelope in the lady's safe," Girard said. "It was unopened, but the lawyer is coming this afternoon." "And you haven't seen its contents?" "No. But the lawyer told us there were recent changes." Poirot narrowed his eyes. Modifications that perhaps did not benefit everyone equally. Girard looked at him with a hint of distrust. "Do you think someone killed the woman to prevent that will from going into effect?" Poirot raised his eyebrows. "But of course, what other powerful reason could move someone to break the symmetry of a curtain?" Girard sighed. "To be honest, I'd bet on Paul Maillard. He's cold, calculating." "That's exactly why," Poirot replied with a faint smile. "I suspect him less." At lunchtime, Poirot briefly crossed paths with Camille in the winter garden. The young woman was smoking a cigarette with a vacant expression, as if each puff dissolved. An uncomfortable memory. "Mademoiselle Camille," said Poirot, coming closer, "would you mind one more question?" She exhaled slowly. "If you insist. Was your aunt at odds with anyone in particular lately?" "Yes," she answered quickly, as if she'd been expecting that question. "Someone from the past. A man. I never met him, but he sent her a letter. I saw it by chance. It had a Marseille letterhead." Poirot tensed. "Marseille?" "Yes." "My aunt turned pale when she read it. She tore it up, but didn't burn it. She threw it in the trash. I saw a word among the pieces, blackmail." "And you didn't ask him anything?" "I didn't dare." But that night she locked herself in the library, and she put on some music, the same piece she used to listen to when she was nervous. A Chopin waltz. Poirot bowed. "It has been a great help, mademoiselle." Camille looked at him for a long second. "Do you think it was one of us?" "But yes, absolutely. It just remains to be seen. Which of you wanted the curtain to stay closed?" Back in his room, Poirot sat down at his notebook. He made a list of names. To each he assigned a symbol: an X next to the colonel, a question mark next to the doctor, a circle next to Camille, a triangle for Paul, an asterisk for Clémence. Then he wrote a sentence. "The truth is not in what they say, but in what they cannot explain." He closed the notebook. The game had really begun. Chapter 4. The Phantom of Marseille. The afternoon fell on the Giverny house like a liquid shadow, enveloping every corner in a thick silence. Rain, predicted the night before, began to gently drum on the windows, as if the sky itself were whispering secrets. Poirot, sitting in a wing chair in the music room, mentally reviewed the crime scene once more. The marble bust, the drawn curtain, the soft music, the telephone, and above all, the fear that still hung in the air like an ancient perfume. 5 o'clock sharp, the lawyer arrived, Maître Gérard Latour, a middle-aged, bald, meticulous man with a worn leather briefcase and an air of hurried importance. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted with a measured bow, "Madame Giverny's will was amended just 10 days ago." "And what is the nature of that change?" Latour solemnly opened his briefcase and took out a sealed envelope. He placed it on the table without opening it yet. "The previous will left the majority of the inheritance to Camille Giverny, your niece, but in the new document—" He paused. "The inheritance is divided into 3 equal parts." Poirot tilted his head. "And the beneficiaries? Camille Giverny, Paul Maillard, and an unexpected name, Jacques Lemoine." Poirot didn't blink. Jacques Lemoine, a man from Marseille, no apparent direct connection to the family. Poirot leaned forward. "And you knew that man?" "Never." But Madame Giverny's tone was clear. "I want to correct an ancient injustice. Udgi, she wrote it in her own hand on the attached note we kept with the document." Poirot slowly got up and began to pace around the room. "Could I see that note?" Latour nodded and took it out of another envelope. Poirot read it silently. The handwriting was shaky but clear. What was denied him out of fear must be returned through justice. Jacques must not be left out of what is rightfully his, and may the past be brought to a close without further shadows. Poirot murmured, "Let the past be closed. What if someone preferred the past to remain buried?" After dismissing the lawyer, Poirot asked Inspector Girard for a personal favour, to track down Jacques Lemoine in Marseille. His unusual name would be easier to locate. "Send an urgent telegram to the main police station. Specify that this is a matter of inheritance, and perhaps murder." Girard nodded without asking any questions. Poirot knew the answers were getting closer. Later that evening, Poirot passed Clémence Dubois in the East Wing corridor. The young woman walked with her head bowed, a closed book clutched to her chest. "Bonsoir, mademoiselle," Poirot greeted. "A walk before bed?" Clémence nodded weakly. "I find it hard to rest in this house. Since what happened, I understand. But tell me, did you know the name Jacques Lemoine?" She stopped. A slight shudder ran across her face. "No, not personally, but I heard it once. 2 weeks ago, Madame Giverny was arguing with Paul. She mentioned that name. It seemed like a threat. On whose behalf? From her. She told him, if Jacques shows up, everything falls apart." Poirot nodded gravely. "Thank you, mademoiselle. Good evening, and watch your step. In this house, secrets walk barefoot." In his room, Poirot sat and meditated. He took out the white handkerchief containing the grey hair found on the curtain. Using a pair of clips, he placed it on a white ceramic plate, examined it with a magnifying glass, and then put it away again. The piece didn't say much, but it said enough. It wasn't Madame Giverny's. Her hair was dark brown, even for her age. It had belonged to a man, an older man, maybe. The thought was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Elise. "Excuse me, sir. I just found this in the wastebasket on Madame Giverny's desk. I thought I should see it." Poirot took the object. A piece of paper torn into 3 pieces, still clinging to ash. Patiently, he pieced them together. Some of the text was burned, but a few words were legible. Blackmail. Marseille. "If you don't accept, I'll talk to Camille." "You can't hide it your whole life." Poirot closed his eyes. The crime wasn't impulsive. It was a warning turned into a sentence. He stood up and walked slowly to the window. The rain was getting heavier. The house was asleep, or pretending to be. Poirot whispered, "Jacques Lemoine, blackmail, a changed will, and someone who killed, not out of greed, but out of fear." He turned back to his notebook. The net is narrowing. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Forgotten Name. The next morning, a timid ray of sunlight finally broke through the curtain of rain. The Giverny garden, still beaded with drops, looked like an impressionist painting. Beautiful, but laden with melancholy. Poirot, however, allowed himself no aesthetic distractions. His attention was focused on a name, Jacques Lemoine. During breakfast, served with the same punctuality and ceremony, despite the crime, Camille seemed more tense than before. Paul flipped through the newspaper with feigned calm. Clémence barely touched her coffee. Colonel Armand muttered about how unacceptable it was. Not to arrest someone yet. Dr. Larocque ate as if the investigation didn't concern him. Poirot just watched them, with eyes that didn't judge, but that noticed everything. At 9 o'clock sharp, a telegram arrived for Poirot. Girard handed it over discreetly. From Marseille Police. Residence, Jacques Lemoine Info. Former merchant Simano known family. He works as a porter in a warehouse in the Port District. No criminal record confirms link with Giverny. Investigating further, Poirot read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully. A merchant sailor. A name forgotten. Or hidden. And still alive. So Jacques isn't a ghost from the past, he murmured. He's the link someone was afraid would speak. Shortly after, Poirot asked to speak to Paul Maillard again, this time in the private reading room. Monsieur Maillard, I must ask you directly, did you know Jacques Lemoine? Paul looked up slowly. Not personally, but I heard about him once, years ago. In what context? An argument between Madame Giverny and her husband when he was still alive. She screamed, "You lied!" to him. He deserved to know. I didn't understand who she was referring to until I heard that name in her office weeks ago. And what did you do when you heard it now, so close to murder? What was due to me? Nothing. I'm not part of his past. Poirot leaned towards him. And what about the will? Did you know you were one of the beneficiaries? Paul hesitated. She mentioned it, but I didn't expect it. Honestly. Poirot observed her face. No anger, no enthusiasm, just resignation. And you had reason to wish Madame Giverny dead? Of course not. Poirot didn't reply, but in his mental notebook that answer sounded too perfect. At mid-morning, Poirot sought out Colonel Armand in the greenhouse, where he was inspecting orchids with martial impatience. "Colonel, did you know Jacques Lemoine? Armand Buffo." "Me? Never. Who the hell is that?" "A name from the past. Someone who, it seemed, was entitled to a share of the inheritance." What nonsense! That woman was losing her mind. Poirot looked at him coldly. Madame Giverny was also considering changing lawyers. "Did you know that?" "No. Why would I?" Poirot did not answer directly. "What if I told you that someone in this house was afraid the will would be read?" Armand narrowed his eyes. "I would tell him that everyone has something to fear when money is involved." Back in his room, Poirot placed 5 objects on the table. The grey hair found on the curtain, the Marseille telegram, the torn note that mentioned blackmail, the New Testament, the piece of the envelope that contained Jacques' letter. He lined them up in a row, like dominoes. What unites all of this? He wondered softly. The fear, the blood, the silence. The answer, still hidden, was beating beneath the surface. In the afternoon, as the atmosphere grew tense again, Poirot received another message. This time it didn't come from outside, but from Clémence Dubois' own hand. A note written in shaky, blue ink, Monsieur Poirot. "There's something I didn't tell you. I heard the music that night because I was in the corridor. I was going to speak to Madame Giverny, but I didn't dare. Then I saw someone come out of the library. I didn't quite recognize him. He was wearing a cloak, but it seemed to me he was limping." Poirot closed his eyes. A man who limps, a curtain drawn with the right hand, a grey hair on the fabric, and a new heir who has yet to speak. Poirot whispered, "The curtain wasn't an accident. It was a signature. The killer didn't just want to kill. He wanted to say something, or hide something that had happened before." And there was still one question that no one had answered. Why did the curtain close? After the crime. Chapter 6. The Limp and the Lie. At 8 o'clock in the evening, under a thick fog that had descended on the countryside like a wet blanket, Poirot returned to the library, this time not to inspect, but to wait. He had discreetly sent notes to everyone present, summoning them one by one with various excuses. A legal question, a detail in the will, a medical observation. No one suspected that he was actually seeking to confirm a physical detail, a limp. In Poirot's eyes, the murderer could not hide his steps. The first to arrive was Dr. Larocque. He walked with ease, overconfident. His shoes were impeccable. His jacket smelled of lavender and ambition. Monsieur Poirot, what do you wish to discuss? A minor medical question, doctor, Poirot said with Belgian courtesy. Could you check my pulse? I sometimes get upset over crimes. Larocque smiled, pleased, and bowed professionally. Poirot made a mental note. No discomfort when bending down. No imbalance. Thank you, Doctor. Everything's fine. Next up was Colonel Armand. His gait was upright and martial. If he was faking it, he'd been doing so for years. Nothing irregular about his step, except for his exaggerated disdain for that nonsense of the past. Then came Camille. Monsieur Poirot, is it so late to talk about my aunt? Poirot stood up gently. I just wanted to look at your shoes. She stopped, surprised. Excuse me? There's mud on your right heel. Did you go out this afternoon? Yes, to the garden, to clear my head. Did your foot hurt? Why do you ask? Because he limps, mademoiselle. Camille parted her lips, but said nothing. Then she let out a strained laugh. It's not a limp. I twisted my ankle yesterday going down the service stairs. Nothing serious. Poirot nodded. I understand. Please, take care of yourself. She left without adding a word. Clémence arrived next. She wore soft slippers and walked like a shadow. She showed no physical signs of anomalousness, but her eyes betrayed accumulated fatigue and unspoken fear. Paul Maillard was the last. Are you in the habit of walking around the house at night, monsieur? Asked Poirot without further preamble. Paul stared at him. No. Why? Clémence Dubois says she saw someone the night of the crime. Someone wearing a cape, and someone who was limping. Paul was unfazed. Interesting. And you attribute it to me? Poirot raised his eyebrows. Should I do it? Paul leaned forward slightly. I sprained my foot 3 weeks ago. It's better now, but yes, I still limp. Does that make me a murderer? No, but it allows me to eliminate those who walk without clumsiness. Paul looked down. She argued with me that night, yes, about the will, but she was alive when I left her. Poirot frowned. When did he leave her? Around 10:30. And the music was playing. Yes, just like always when she wanted no one to bother her. Poirot approached the closed curtain. He touched it as if it were a confession page. Tell me, Paul, did you know that Madame Giverny kept a copy of the old will in this very desk? No, but I'm not surprised. She was cautious to the point of paranoia. Poirot turned around. And if you were afraid someone would want to prevent the redistribution, who do you think would have had the most to lose? Paul didn't respond. He just stared at the marble bust, still wrapped in evidence. That night, Poirot returned to his room with the feeling that the web was beginning to close. The crucial detail was now in his hands. All that remained was to arrange the pieces visible to the others. In his notebook he wrote, Limps. Paul, lie about limp. Camille. Fear, Clémence. Rabia, Armand. Opportunity, Larocque. Then he drew a line under all those names and wrote a single sentence. Only one knew that the curtain should not move. While the house slept, Poirot quietly went down to the library. There, at the foot of the lowest shelf, he found what he was looking for. A small, thin, knotted rope. Hidden behind a thick volume of encyclopedias, it hung discreetly from the skirting board. "Ingenious," he whispered. The rope was tied to the end of the right curtain cord. Pulling from the outside, even from the keyhole, it could be drawn. Only someone who knew exactly how to do it could. Where and displacing it could have been done without being seen. Poirot sat up slowly. So, it wasn't just a cosmetic mistake. It was a sign, a message for me, and indeed he had received it. Chapter 7. The Name Written Twice. At dawn the next day, Poirot was in the greenhouse. The Givony house was still asleep, but his suspicions were already sharp. Wearing light grey, leather gloves, and staring at the mist-covered horizon, he pondered the rope found behind the books. A subtle device, designed not for escape, but to manipulate the scene. Say something. The Fordelite something. A meticulous crime requires an equally orderly mind to be understood, and Poirot knew that in that house only one mind fit the profile. It was then that Elise, the maid, appeared, nervous, with a sealed envelope in her hand. Monsieur Poirot. This was found in Madame Givony's room, under the sofa cushion. It was hand-embroidered. Perhaps it was forgotten during the search. Poirot took the envelope and turned it over between his fingers. It was unsealed. He opened it gently. Inside was a single piece of paper, yellowish, with rounded edges, written in black ink. "If anything happens to me, look for the red notebook in the library. It's not in plain sight. I hid it well. Only Jacques would know where. He'll remember. The name written twice." Poirot murmured, "The name written twice. A clue? A sign?" He immediately returned to the library. He studied each shelf. He ran his finger over the spines, over the dust, over the invisible indentations that only a keen eye could notice. Finally, in the third row of the south shelf, between a biography of Napoleon and a collection of plays, he found a small uneven space. He carefully removed 2 books and saw it, a red notebook, no title, no labels. He opened it. Inside, notes in Madame Givony's handwriting, fragments of thoughts, lists, a kind of hidden diary, and on the 3rd page, underlined twice, Lemoine. Lemoine. Poirot closed his eyes. The surname of the man from Marseille. Repeated as if in prayer or remorse. And on the next page, something even more disturbing. "I can't bear this any longer. He has the right to know. Camille will never accept it, but Jacques must know the truth. The name may be his, but the blood is mine." Poirot stood still. My God, Camille isn't what she seems. Shortly after, Poirot asked to speak to Clémence, privately. The young woman looked even more haggard. Her eyes were sunken, her hands clenched. He received her politely. "Mademoiselle, did you know anything about Camille's family that was never said out loud?" She was slow to respond. Then she nodded slowly. "I heard rumours. Years ago. Madame Giverny was away for a while, just after her husband died. They say she had a slip in Marseille. And Camille isn't your brother's daughter. She's Madame Giverny's daughter. Born in secret. Raised as a niece to avoid scandal. But no one said it openly." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "And James?" "A sailor, her lover from that time. He disappeared. It was said he died at sea. But maybe not." Poirot stood up. Mademoiselle, you have confirmed the essentials. Later, Poirot confronted Camille. Mademoiselle, I need your honesty. Did you know your mother's true identity? She froze. What do you mean? Poirot stared at her. You're not a niece, you're a daughter. Madame Giverny wrote it in her own hand, and the will was her way of clearing that moral debt. Camille looked down, but didn't deny it. And James? It was his father. Poirot approached, lowering his tone. Did you know? I only found out a month ago. I found an old letter. I didn't want to believe it, I couldn't. And you argued with Madame Giverny about that? Yes. I yelled at her that she was a coward, that she'd lied to me all her life. She looked at me with a sadness I'll never forget. Poirot nodded. And then you retired, or so you say. I took a sedative. I slept until the next morning. It wasn't me, Monsieur Poirot. I swear it wasn't. That night, Poirot put all the pieces in his notebook. Jacques Lemoine, lover from the past, and Camille's biological father, Madame Giverny. She hid the truth for years, and when she revealed it, she changed her will. Paul Maillard, he knew more than he admitted. A rope to manipulate the curtain, a blackmail letter, and a lie. Someone pretended not to know who Jacques Lemoine was. Poirot closed his notebook and whispered, The crime was not committed out of greed, but out of desperation. A truth was about to explode, and someone preferred eternal silence rather than seeing it come to light. Chapter 8. The Witness Who Didn't Speak. The next day, when the sky finally cleared completely, Poirot knew that Madame Giverny's murder was no longer just a matter of money or inheritance, but of identity. That crime, like all the deepest, was born from the fear of a repressed truth. A truth that had become poison, and the poison in action. It was just as Poirot was having breakfast alone, a perfectly hot cup of black coffee and a croissant split with a butter knife, that Elise reappeared, this time paler than ever. Monsieur Poirot! I found something else. He invited her to sit down with a friendly gesture. Mademoiselle, you look like a ghost. What have you found? A handkerchief. It was tucked behind the hall table in the east wing. I swept it up every day, but today it slipped and I noticed something. He handed him a neatly folded white linen handkerchief. Poirot unfolded it slowly. In one corner, and embroidered, were the initials PM. In another, a dark stain. It smelled unmistakably of iron. Blood. Poirot narrowed his eyes. So the killer got hurt, or soiled himself when he moved the body. Elise nodded in a barely audible voice. No one came through that area, except for Paul, the night before the discovery. I saw him. He was coming out of the east wing, but when he looked at me, he said he was just looking for a glass of water. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And you didn't consider it important before? No, monsieur. I was scared. Paul was always reserved. But that night there was something strange about his eyes. Later, Poirot confronted Paul in the garden, by the pond where the water lilies were beginning to open in the sun. Monsieur Maillard, allow me one more question. Why did you lie about not leaving your room that night? Paul looked at him silently. I didn't lie. Poirot took out his handkerchief. Is this yours? Paul recognized the object instantly. A shadow crossed his face. Yes, but I lost it days ago. It was stained with blood, hidden, near the spot where someone tampered with the curtain cord. Paul pressed his lips together. That doesn't prove anything. No, said Poirot, but you're beginning to suggest too much. Paul took a step back. I didn't kill her. Poirot looked at him for a long time. Maybe he didn't do it, but he knows who did, and he's becoming an accomplice by silence. Later, Poirot met with Inspector Gerard in the office. Mr. Gerard, I need your help calling a final meeting. I want everyone present tonight in the main hall. Have you solved the case? I'm about to do it. But I won't do it with an arrest warrant, but with logic, as always. Gerard nodded. And what will we do with Lemoine? He's still in Marseille. He won't make it in time. But he's already spoken to the authorities. His story changes everything. Hours later, in the dimness of the living room, Poirot stood before the 5 suspects. The atmosphere was tense, almost theatrical. My lords and ladies, he began, this house is full of secrets. But there is one more burdensome than all. That of a truth that was silenced out of fear, and that, in trying to reveal itself, caused a death. He looked at Camille. Camille wasn't the niece. She was the daughter. An illegitimate daughter, yes, but a legitimate daughter at heart. Madame Giverny wanted to correct that silence, but for someone here, that truth represented the total collapse of a life built on another lie. He turned to Paul. You, Monsieur Maillard, knew about the change to the will, and you suspected, or knew, that not only would you lose your place as preferred heir, but also that your closeness to Madame Giverny would no longer be interpreted as trust, but as control. Paul looked down. Poirot continued. But you weren't been the murderer. Everyone looked at him, surprised. No, you arrived after. He found the body. He got dirty trying to cover up what had happened. Maybe out of fear, maybe to protect someone. Poirot turned, this time towards Clémence. You said you saw a cloaked figure, limping, and the only person who denied limping is Camille. Camille sat up stiffly. That doesn't mean anything. No, you lied about the sedative. You weren't asleep. You knew about the will. You knew your mother wanted Jacques Lemoine not only to receive a share of the inheritance, but to be acknowledged as your father. Your shame, your past, and you who always believed you came from a respectable line couldn't bear it. Camille shook her head. I just wanted to talk. She confronted me. She mocked me. She said the last name wasn't important, but it is. Poirot lowered his tone. And then silence, long. The ticking of the living room clock was the only response, until Camille murmured, It wasn't planned, it just happened. Poirot closed his eyes. No, mademoiselle, crime never happens. It builds, in silence, like a curtain that slowly closes until everything is left in darkness. Girard stood up. There was no need for further words. Camille did not protest. Chapter 9. The curtain closes. Camille Giverny offered no resistance when Girard firmly and discreetly applied the handcuffs. Her eyes, cold but watery, looked at Poirot without hatred, without pleading, only with the resignation of someone defeated by something stronger than justice. The truth. No one in the room said a word. Clémence covered her mouth with both hands. Colonel Armand kept his gaze fixed on the carpet. Paul Maillard, for the first time, seemed truly dejected. Poirot remained standing for a few more seconds. Then he made a slight gesture towards Gérard. "Wait, there's still something everyone here needs to understand." Gérard nodded. Camille lowered her gaze, as if accepting that the humiliation must be completed. Poirot addressed everyone, walking slowly around the room. Mademoiselle Camille's murder wasn't an act of pure evil. It was a crime of broken identity. Since she was a child, she lived believing herself to be someone she wasn't. When she discovered that her lineage was the result of a forbidden love, her world collapsed. He stopped next to the closed piano. Madame Giverny, in her desire to correct the past, did not calculate how much pain it would cause in the present. And that, my friends, does not excuse the crime, but it explains it. Camille raised her head, her voice almost muffled. She told me Jacques was coming, that he wanted to meet me, that maybe he wanted to stay, that he didn't care about the money. How could I allow it? How could he do that to me? Poirot approached her. Your mother's intention wasn't to hurt you, but to free you. But you chose silence, definitively. When she was taken away, the atmosphere became lighter, and at the same time, denser. Paul was the first to speak. How did you know it wasn't me? Poirot replied without hesitation. Because you doubted too much. Those who kill to silence don't doubt. Besides, the handkerchief trail was too clear. You left it hidden, not lost, like someone covering up the scene to protect or to buy time. Paul slumped into an armchair. I didn't want Camille to be discovered like that. I thought if the police found the rope, they'd blame the colonel. She was my friend, maybe more. Poirot looked at him with a mixture of understanding and firmness. Her mistake was protecting someone who was already determined to destroy everything. The curtain wasn't just a distraction, it was a signal. Camille knew her mother hated asymmetry. Closing it was her way of saying, here's the mess you've made. Clémence approached, still trembling. And Jacques? Does he know everything? Yes, Poirot said gently. A letter will reach her with the truth. A letter her mother left behind, and which the lawyer will keep. I don't know if that will console her, but I do know that at least she won't live the rest of her days without knowing who she was, or who her daughter was. Hours later, Poirot retired to his room. He carefully unpacked his suitcase, lining up each item with the same care with which he had unravelled the case. He sat down in front of his leather notebook and, as always, wrote a final reflection. This time, he did so out loud. Order, truth, symmetry. These are not just matters of aesthetics. They are the natural laws of the human soul. When they are broken, when their course is reversed, chaos soon follows. Madame Giverny tried to restore balance, but she forgot the most crucial thing, that not everyone is ready for the truth. He closed the notebook. The curtain was the key, a symbolic gesture. The crime was there, not in the blow with the bust, not even in the confession. It was in the deliberately imposed disorder. She poured herself a cup of tea with lemon and no sugar, and looked up out the window. The garden was silent except for the song of a robin, and now the house can sleep in peace. The next morning, Poirot left on the first train to Paris. As he stepped out, he briefly turned toward the mansion. The sun touched the second-floor windows, and for a moment he thought he saw the curtains perfectly open, symmetrical. He smiled. That's how it should be. Chapter 10. The Silence After the Echo. Paris, 3 days later. Winter was arriving early in the capital. Leaves were gathering on the edges of the Rue des Martyrs. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and ancient dampness. Poirot walked with measured steps along the boulevard Haussmann, sporting his new walking stick and a perfectly brushed wool coat. The city buzzed around him, but his mind remained on Giverny, as if some part of the mystery had not yet been fully unravelled. I had received a letter that morning. It came from Marseille. It was written in simple, unadorned handwriting. Mr. Poirot, I received Lorraine's letter. I've read her words over and over again. At first I felt angry, then sad, but in the end I understood. I don't know if I can forgive the dead, but I can make peace with who I was. Thank you for seeking the truth. Jacques Lemoine Poirot folded it slowly and put it in his inside jacket pocket. Then he sat down at his usual café, ordered a hot chocolate, and stared thoughtfully out the window. In Giverny, silence had returned, not the dense silence of secrets, but a new, cleaner one, like the air left after a storm. Clémence Dubois had decided to leave the mansion. She had received an offer to teach piano in Lyon. Her farewell with Paul was brief, without tears, but with a tacit understanding. They had both lost something in that house, something that couldn't be recovered. Colonel Armand, for his part, withdrew even further into his orchid world, distancing himself from anything human. He never spoke of the case again. For him, it was an awkward episode, an absurd wound to the pure-de-tout facade of family honour. Paul Maillard remained in the house for a few more weeks, organising the paperwork and assisting the lawyer with the will, which would now be divided between the Giverny Foundation for Children Without a Family and Jacques Lemoine, who accepted it without resistance, but asked that his name not appear on plaques, letters, or recognitions. I just want silence, he had said. The noise has already taken its toll. A month later, Poirot was invited to a small reception at the home of Maître Latour, the lawyer, where he was formally thanked for his assistance. He modestly declined the spotlight, limiting himself to a glass of white wine and a brief remark to the audience. Justice, my friends, isn't always a hammer that falls with force. Sometimes it's a hand that lifts the veil of human error and reveals, without accusing, what really happened. That same evening, back in his apartment, Poirot dusted off a box containing mementos from closed cases. There, he carefully placed 3 objects: the handkerchief with the initials PM, a copy of the amended will, and a small replica of the rope that closed the curtain. He tucked them away among newspaper clippings and archived letters, as if they were medals from a private war. Then he poured himself a cup of tea and turned on the radio. A waltz played in the background, and suddenly it stopped. The same waltz, Chopin. Poirot smiled. Ah, Madame Giverny. Even in her farewell she wanted to say something. The reflection came alone, as Poirot's thoughts usually do, to the edge of the empty cup. Sometimes crime isn't committed for money, or out of hatred, but for identity, out of fear of losing oneself when the truth comes. And then, for some, killing doesn't seem as unthinkable as looking in the mirror. He stood up and went to look out the window. The city lights flickered like musical notes, and there, amidst the Parisian bustle, Poirot murmured, "But there is always, always, a curtain that someone has accidentally drawn, and as long as that exists, small grey cells will continue to have work." Chapter 11. The Flower of Guilt. 2 weeks had passed since Hercule Poirot returned to Paris. The days had begun to lengthen, but the detective noticed a persistent restlessness in his mind. It was unusual for him. The logical certainty of the Giverny case was complete, and yet something in the atmosphere surrounding the crime remained unclear. It wasn't a doubt, but a sensation, like a perfume that never quite faded. One morning, while organizing his personal files, Poirot received an unexpected visitor. Elise, the Giverny maid, wearing a dark coat and simple hat, waited timidly in the ante-room of Poirot's building. "Mademoiselle Elise," he greeted, surprised but courteous. "What brings you to Paris?" "I haven't been able to sleep, Monsieur Poirot, since you left. What I saw, what no said." Poirot showed her into his drawing-room, offered her tea without insistence, and waited. She held the cup without drinking. "Night of the crime," Elise began, looking down at the floor. "I saw Mademoiselle Camille go up to the library around 11 o'clock. She was carrying something in her hand, a book, but it wasn't from the house." Poirot watched her without blinking. "Why didn't you say it before?" "Because it didn't seem important. But then, when I was tidying the rooms, I found that book in the conservatory, hidden under the sofa. It was wet. Apparently, someone threw it out the window, and then picked it up." Poirot sat up slowly. "Do you still have it?" Elise nodded. She took a package from her bag. Poirot opened it with precise hands. It was an old edition of Les Miserables. On page 300, a pressed flower. A flower? An orchid! One of those Colonel Armand looked after. Poirot kept silence. That afternoon, Poirot went to see the Colonel. He found him, as always, in his greenhouse, accompanied only by his walking stick, his orchids, and a pocket watch that he checked every 10 minutes. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted with concealed displeasure. "Here again. Duty doesn't always end with arrest. Sometimes it continues with understanding." The Colonel snorted. Camille confessed. Case closed. Poirot took out the book and placed it on a gardening table. The Colonel didn't touch it. "Do you recognize this flower?" Silence. From her soles. It was pressed carefully, like one does with important memories. Armand clenched his jaw. "What are you implying? That Camille didn't act alone? That someone helped her cover her tracks? Or that someone else intervened afterward?" Poirot opened the book to another page. On the back cover, in pencil, a sentence written in quick handwriting. "It's not the blood that hurts, but the wound that didn't heal." "Is it yours?" The Colonel did not respond. Poirot lowered his tone. Monsieur Armand, why would you plant that flower in a book that doesn't belong to you? Or were you the one who gave it to Camille?" For the first time, Armand seemed to lose control. He slammed the book shut. "I didn't kill Lorraine. I never would have. I hated her, yes, but duty is duty, and Camille? She was a lost child, not a murderer. If she committed the crime, it was out of weakness or desperation, not out of malice." Poirot approached. "What did Camille say to you that night?" Silence. "He confessed to you that he had hit Madame Giverny, right?" Armand nodded finally. "He came to me. He told me he'd argued with Lorraine, that he couldn't take it any more, that he pushed her, that it was an impulse." Poirot looked at him sadly. "And what did you do?" "I told her to go to her room, not to talk. And then I went upstairs. I found Lorraine dead. She wasn't breathing any more. The bust, it was still bleeding. I closed the curtain. I thought I should hide her, that the scandal would destroy her. And the rope, I put it there, to divert attention, to protect her." Poirot lowered his gaze. "So, it wasn't just guilt. It was ACO responsibility. You sealed the scene, Colonel. That's why Camille remained silent until the very end. Not out of fear of the police, but out of fear of betraying you as—" "He left the greenhouse," Poirot wrote in his notebook. "Sometimes crime isn't divided between the innocent and the guilty, but between those who kill and those who help keep the silence alive." He closed the notebook, and finally, the lingering scent of the case began to dissipate. Chapter 12. Order restored. A week later, the Giverny mansion remained absolutely silent but not empty. There was a new kind of order within its walls. The rooms, once charged with invisible tension, seemed to have finally exhaled. The police no longer roamed the halls. Camille had been transferred to a temporary prison on the outskirts of Paris. Paul Maillard left without a farewell letter, leaving only a formal note of his resignation. Clémence also left for Lyon. Only Colonel Armand remained, and only Poirot returned. The Belgian detective, impeccable as always, was received without ceremony. He walked directly to the library, where the Colonel was waiting for him, standing by the window. This time, the curtains were symmetrical, open. The light streamed in, illuminating the room with a purity that didn't seem to belong in that house. "Monsieur Poirot," the Colonel greeted him in a gruff voice. "Colonel Armand, I've come to speak, not as an accuser, but as a witness to the closing of a cycle." The Colonel didn't reply. He simply poured 2 glasses of cognac and offered one to the detective. Poirot declined with a polite gesture. "Does the police know what you know?" "No, and they won't know." Camille was judged by the act itself, not by what followed. "You protected her, monsieur, with that silent maneuver, but I won't reveal it." Armand took a deep breath. "I didn't do it for her, or for Lorraine. I did it because I'm a man of principle. An impulsive act didn't deserve a public execution. I preferred to close the circle here." Poirot approached the curtain, the same one that had been drawn that evening. He ran his finger along the fabric, now dust-free, without a trace. "You knew you couldn't keep it hidden for long, but you at least hoped that when it came out, it wouldn't do any more harm. Armand nodded. Camille fell apart when she confessed to me what she'd done. I was the only one who ever believed in her fortitude. I couldn't let the world see her fall. So you decided to intervene, asked Poirot. Not to cover for her, but to give her time. Time for her to decide whether to confess or remain silent. Poirot looked at him straight in the eye. And he chose the latter. But the past can't be suppressed forever. I know. A brief silence settled between the two men. Poirot then allowed himself a slight smile. It's funny, Colonel. I've always thought of crime as a mirror. The person who commits it ends up seeing their reflection, whether they want to or not. And what did you see this time? I saw a broken family that tried to mend its ways too late, a daughter who didn't know who she was, a father who never knew he existed, a woman who wanted to redeem her mistakes and died for it. The Colonel poured himself another glass. This time he drank it. And you? Poirot looked at the whole library, the books, the clock, the place where the body lay. I saw that even in crime there is beauty. Tragic beauty, yes, but order. Because in the end, the pieces always fit together, and the curtains align. That evening, back in his Parisian apartment, Poirot opened his notebook to the last page of the Givony case. He wrote in black ink and with a firm hand. Case closed. Crime. Murder on impulse. Sealed with concealment by loyalty. Murderer. Camille Givony. Illegitimate daughter. Indirect accomplice. Colonel Armand. Protector of the family name and the facade. Reason. Denied identity. Delayed truth. Fear of being seen as less. Key to the case. The curtain closed after the crime. Not before. The symbol of intolerable disorder. He put down his pen and looked out the window. The city was asleep. A breeze gently moved the curtains but didn't disturb them. He smiled and he said in a low voice, "In the end, that's what it's all about. Restoring order. Letting the truth, even when it hurts, take its rightful place." And with that last thought, he closed the notebook